When I was in my early 20s, I received a phone call from my dad inviting me to go with him to Disneyland. Now, what you need to know is this was not just a fun father-daughter trip. This was him needing an extra set of hands. My dad, in his third marriage, not to be confused with his second marriage, had 4 children, a 6-year-old and 3 4-year-olds. He had triplets. And so when he was calling to invite me to come, he was also saying, hey, we could use your help. I love Disneyland, and while Disneyland is the happiest place on earth, I quickly figured out road tripping with 4 small children is not. There were some dark moments. I got hit in the eyebrow with a sippy cup of milk, which we couldn't find for hours later. It ended up upside down in my brand new black Tommy Hilfiger purse, and it had caked milk in it, and it was never the same again. I just had to let that go. Now, people are more important than things, and I love my little sisters and my brother, but it was an interesting trip that had some nuances that are only possible when you're with family and lots of small children. Now, one day, after we had had a bunch of time together, not exactly sure about how we divided up or why, but my dad and I went off alone, and my stepmom took the 4 littles to go ride a few rides. We synchronized our watches, and we were going to meet back at a bench in front of the castle at 2:00. My dad worked overseas in China at the time, so cell phones weren't exactly working, and this was a couple decades ago, so the technology wasn't as great as it is now. So we said 2:00, made sure our watches were all in the same time zone, and we agreed to meet back at an iconic spot where anyone could find or ask directions to get back to. Well, my dad and I returned at about 2:00. At 2:15, there is no stepmom. At 2:30, no stepmom. At 2:45, no stepmom. And I start to throw a 20-year-old fit about why she is never on time. She doesn't care about us. I could be standing in line right now. And my dad sits me down, and we sit on the bench, and he puts his arm around me, and he says, I like sitting in front of the castle with my dad. And he shakes me, which is my cue to repeat. And so I say, I like sitting in front of the castle with my dad. And then he asks me a question he had asked me maybe 100 times before. He asked me when I was young and 12. He asked me as a teenager. He asked me every time he saw me. The nieces and nephews came to expect it at family gatherings and trips. And he said, Michelle, what's the meaning of life? Now, when I was 12 years old, my answer was babysitting. He didn't laugh at me, but he just asked me why I loved it and continued to ask the question and gave us lots of space for figuring out what our meaning of life was. Over time, I'm sure once or twice I said boys or dating, and I would say debate or drama or whatever play I was in. And it was just one of those opportunities for me to say that my meaning of life is in this thing. Looking back, I'm grateful for all the times he asked me the question, because it gave me opportunities to mature and develop and to think about what the meaning of life truly was for me. And he gave me space and permission to change my mind. He gave me space to say silly things. But by the time I was, 22 and having this conversation with my dad sitting at the castle at Disneyland, my arms folded, not quite ready to be soft and patient. I was like, to be happy, which was probably my answer from the few times before. What I didn't know then, but I know now, is it would be the very last time my dad would ever ask me that question. When he went home and our trip was done, he went back to China and he passed away 6 weeks later of SARS. Now, gratefully, we had a number of other experiences where I wasn't throwing a 20-something temper tantrum, so that wasn't the last thing I remember of him. But I think about that question regularly. I think about the ways he used it to engage with strangers and friends. I think about ultimately what it means for each of us. So if you were to see my dad and he were to ask you, what's the meaning of life? What would you say? What would that mean for you? What we have found is that having a sense of purpose matters. In fact, in our most recent study, we found that 87% of Americans agree that having a sense of purpose leads to greater happiness in their lives. So do you feel like you have a sense of purpose? Do you have meaning that excites you in getting out of bed every morning? Do you know what you focus on, that even in the midst of running carpool or getting a report done for work or going on trips and vacations or handling bills and situations with your neighbors, in the midst of all of those everyday micro stressors, Do you have something that brings you purpose? Good news is that studies show that it doesn't have to be something big. Sometimes when we think about having a meaning in life or having a sense of purpose, we think about giant things like curing cancer or overcoming a big, ginormous challenge or finding a way to be Mother Teresa and serve. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be big enough for you. Big enough for you to want to get out of bed. Big enough for you to work on your purpose despite your challenges. And big enough for you to care. One of my favorite stories on this matter is a woman that I met accidentally. It was October 1st, and I was driving my kids to school across town, and I noticed that the crossing guard was dressed like a lumberjack. And when I say dressed like a lumberjack, I mean head to toe. We've got a fluorescent hat, plaid shirt, suspenders, gloves, work jeans, and an axe, which I thought was a really odd and interesting combination with a stop sign, and questioned whether or not that was a great combination, but luckily said nothing to my kids and just made a mental note. That's interesting. The next day, October 2nd, we were driving by, and she is dressed up as Winnie the Pooh, and her 4-year-old son is dressed up like Tigger. And then I thought to myself, I get it, October, Halloween, they are dressing up. And she continued to dress up every single day. And about 2 weeks in, she dressed up like a Ghostbuster. And I have a great heart for the 80s. And that was when I pulled over. And I was like, you've got to tell me your name. What is going on? Tell me about you. She told me her name. She told me what she was doing. And she told me that she had a stomach condition that has made it really hard for her to get out of bed every morning. And she needed an excuse to get up and see her kids off to school. And she started in August when school started, and a couple months in, she started to recognize and realize that it wasn't just for her and for her family, but all of the kids that she interacted with every day, morning and afternoon, when they crossed her crosswalk, that she could have a positive impact on them. They would say things like, I'm nervous, I've got a math test today. And then at the end of the day, come back and report how they did. She could say, good luck, or have fun, or celebrate spirit weeks with those kids. And so she thought that maybe one October she could just make people smile, and she dressed up. Well, on November 1st, I will admit that as I was driving to school, I was a little sad that I wouldn't see her dressed up, being the neighborhood crossing guard. But to my surprise, she was. She was dressed up like a pilgrim, and then she dressed up like turkeys, and then she dressed up all month long in celebration of Thanksgiving and gratitude. She didn't stop in December. She dressed up like each of the reindeer. And in case you've forgotten, she dressed up like Cupid and Donner and Blitzen. And she dressed up like different Christmas carols. And it was a surprise and a delight. And for years, she continued to dress up. Now, sure, some mornings you would just see her in her regular clothes, but more often than not, she had on some type of costume. Or if it was Dr. Seuss week, she would dress up like Dr. Seuss characters. And she brought happiness and joy to the people around her. And she brought it to me. I remember thinking one day when I was dropping off my daughter at her elementary school, it would be the very last time I would see her. Once we went to other schools, it would be the wrong times and we wouldn't cross that same street and we wouldn't see her again. And I, in that moment, recognized the impact that she had on me. But gratefully, that impact was important to her too. She had a sense of purpose, a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and it extended beyond her family, and she was able to impact the community. Having that sense of purpose is powerful. And not only will it bring you fulfillment in your life, but it can bring you happiness. I have often found that having a sense of purpose and having happiness together are intertwined. When you feel like you are up to good things, you will feel happier in your life. When you feel like you're wasting your day away or not spending it on things that bring you personal value and fulfillment, then at the end of the day, you can feel discouraged, and that can lead to depression and anxiety. So how can you bring in even a simple sense of purpose? I'm not asking you to dress up. I'm not asking you to change what you do for a living, but maybe you decide that you could do one act of service a week, or maybe you decide that you could send letters to neighbors and friends and try to lift their spirits. There's a man in my neighborhood who every single Monday after the trash man comes, he brings all trash cans up to the garage door. To so much so that his work schedule changed and now he doesn't do it anymore. And we all remember, oh, Joe doesn't do that anymore. But it gave him a sense of purpose and a reason when he was working at home, working remotely, to find ways to connect with his community and to give him a reason to serve and to do something. So find something small. While micro stressors can impact your life, micro moments filled with purpose can impact your life as well and can bring you some relief to those everyday challenges that are affecting your happiness and your productivity. It matters personally and it matters professionally. So your sense of purpose could be your work. In fact, the study that we just completed showed that those who have a graduate degree and are working in their field of study are actually happier than those who don't. And that doesn't mean that you have to go get a graduate degree, but it shows that the investment people make in things that matter and working on their own personal joys and interests and hobbies actually makes a difference to your own personal wellness. So what can you do to improve your personal wellness through your own purpose? Having a sense of purpose matters, and it can be simple. It doesn't have to be big. So give yourself permission to dream if you don't have one, and stay committed to your purpose if you do. It makes a difference, whether you believe it or not. That sense of purpose can bring you personal clarity each day so that you can find and look for happiness and be positive in all the right places. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. I'd love to hear about your sense of purpose or how you discover it or the questions that you ask yourself. Please share it in the comments below and watch and stay tuned for next week's video.